Study 117. What happens when a conceptual art program builds its own cognitive infrastructure? From the Objects of Affection collection. Objects of Affection collection as a case study in institutional cognition, artistic continuity, and post-luxury conceptual practice. A critical investigation into the cultural, institutional, and philosophical implications of engineering bespoke cognitive infrastructure as a primary act of artistic practice, and as an object of affection in its own right. This study documents and theorizes a phenomenon that has not previously existed in the history of art institutions. A single founder who has built from proprietary code across 33 build iterations, a bespoke sovereign intelligence infrastructure. Not as a productivity tool, not as an administrative convenience, but as the primary mechanism of artistic continuity, and more radically, as an object of affection in its own right. The institution in question is the Objects of Affection collection OAC, founded by Christopher Banks in New York in 2025, operating under the post-luxury conceptual functional art (PLCFA) framework, a proprietary critical theory that diagnoses the systematic evacuation of material singularity from contemporary luxury culture. The study advances a central argument that has not previously been made. OAC's critical studies produced the theoretical framework. The framework produced the cognitive infrastructure. The infrastructure compounded the studies, and the compounded studies deepened the framework. This is a closed loop of meaning production, the first of its kind in the history of critical art institutions. The study also places this achievement against its precise technological moment. The tools that made this specific build possible did not exist until May 19, 2026, when Google I/O 2026 introduced native Android vibe coding in Google AI Studio, powered by Gemini 3.5 Flash. By the weekend following that announcement, 5 days after the capability was released to the world, OAC had a working prototype. OAC Agent Command is currently at v6.6.4, that is not a version number in the conventional software sense. It is an evidentiary record, a compounding sovereign research platform built by a single non-engineer through conceptual direction of AI coding agents, advancing from working prototype to v6.6.4 in approximately 15 days, each version substantial. Each version adding institutional capacity the previous version could not support. The fact that this institution could not have existed 1 month before this study was published is not a technical footnote. It is a historical argument about what becomes possible at the precise intersection of a mature theoretical framework, a sovereign institutional practice, and an emergent technological capability, and what that intersection produces when the person at its center is not a software engineer, but a critical theorist building with intent. The argument no one else is making. There is a specific conversation happening across the luxury industry, the museum world, and the Critical Theory Academy about the relationship between artificial intelligence and cultural production. It is, with few exceptions, the wrong conversation. The luxury industry is asking whether AI can personalize the client journey while preserving the brand's aura. LVMH has committed hundreds of millions to what it calls an AI factory. Museums are asking whether AI can accelerate collection digitization. Critical theorists are asking whether AI-generated work constitutes authentic authorship. These are consequential questions. They are also, in every case, questions about how existing institutions might deploy AI as a tool without reconceiving what they are. The tool serves the institution. The institution is unchanged. The Objects of Affection collection is asking a different question. Not, how should an art institution use AI, but, what happens when a conceptual art program treats cognitive infrastructure itself as the primary medium of institutional practice? What happens when the system that perceives, remembers, synthesizes, and projects is not a licensed platform, but a bespoke, constitutionally governed intelligence architecture built line by line, version by version, across 33 build iterations, by a single founder who is not a software engineer but a critical theorist, a designer, a music producer, and an anthropologist of luxury? The answer, documented in this study for the first time. The result is the first single-author institution in the history of critical art practice whose cognitive apparatus compounds over time, accumulates evidentiary depth with every published study, and actively defends its own vocabulary against institutional necrophagy, using its own archive as the primary instrument of defense. No prior institution has built this. No prior framework has theorized it. No prior critical study has named it. This study does all three. The question is not how an art institution should use AI. The question is what happens when an art institution treats cognitive infrastructure itself as the primary medium of practice and builds accordingly. That question has a first answer. It is the OAC, historical lineages, what had to exist before this became possible. To understand the full significance of what OAC has built, one must understand the three intellectual traditions it synthesizes, and why none of them, alone or in combination, had previously produced the phenomenon this study documents. Conceptual art, as established by Lewitt, Weiner, Kossuth, and the broader dematerialization movement of the 1960s, made a foundational claim that the idea, the instruction, the proposition could carry aesthetic weight, equal to or exceeding any physical artifact. OAC's PLCFA framework is a direct inheritor. Its insistence that narrative permanence and labor density constitute the primary substance of an object's value is conceptualism's commitment to the proposition over the product, extended into the post-luxury era. What OAC adds is the recognition that the proposition must be actively defended, architecturally, over time, or it will be consumed by the forces conceptualism never fully theorized. Systems art, shaped by cybernetic theory, and the work of Hans Harkey and the Experiments in Art and Technology group, introduced the notion that artworks could be dynamic, rule-governed, temporally extended networks. OAC's cognitive infrastructure is legible as art history through this lens. It is a systems artwork whose inputs are cultural signals from across the global luxury, art and critical theory landscape, whose transformation logic is the four ontological poles of the PLCFA framework, whose outputs are studies, objects, music, and institutional positions, and whose feedback mechanism is the compounding archive that makes every new output more precise than the last. Institutional critique, from Asher to Fraser to Lawler, turned the analytical lens onto the administrative apparatus of art's most powerful institutions. OAC inherits this critical posture and inverts its direction. Rather than critiquing external institutions from the position of the interloper, it builds a counter-institution whose administrative structure is itself governed by the theoretical framework it espouses. As examined in the custodian's contract, OAC's operational protocols are not separate from its artistic argument. They are expressions of it. Conceptual art gave us the proposition over the product. Systems art gave us the network as an aesthetic object. Institutional critique gave us the administrative apparatus as artistic material. OAC is the institution in which all three traditions converge and produce something none of them individually anticipated. A closed loop of meaning production in which the institution's outputs generate its capacity to produce further outputs. Seth Siegelaub and Robert Projansky's Artists' Reserved Rights Transfer and Sale Agreement of 1971 is OAC's most direct legal ancestor, the foundational document of anti-speculative contractual design in the art world. OAC extends this framework across the full spectrum of bespoke material production. Garments, accessories, furniture, fragrances, functional art objects, making it the first institution to apply anti-speculative contractual architecture systematically across material categories. Of 39 objects produced and placed, not one has appeared on the secondary market. Objects of Affection Collection, the institution as argument. The Objects of Affection collection is not legible through any single existing institutional category. It is not a studio, a gallery, a consultancy, or an academic department. It is a sovereign critical research institution whose primary product is an argument about the nature of value, materiality, and custodianship in contemporary culture, and whose every output is a localized expression of that argument in a specific material register. The PLCFA framework operates through four ontological poles: object permanence, speculative velocity, material singularity, and custodial stewardship, and a 29-term proprietary lexicon that constitutes OAC's primary intellectual property. These terms, institutional necrophagy, hollowed object, aura transaction, semantic burden, zero-sum aura, did not exist before OAC coined them. They are now being deployed by external commentators, appropriated without attribution by commercial actors, and tracked in real time by OAC's intelligence infrastructure. As documented in Institutional Lexical Hijacking, intellectual property in the post-luxury era is defended not by lawyers alone, but by the compounding, active self-awareness of the institution that produced it. The commission practice, governed by the one original principle, is OAC's material practice. Each object is produced under carte blanche. The founder disappears to research the commission, returns with a material proposal drawn from global artisan networks, and delivers the object at a private event of institutional significance. The client does not own the object. They are temporarily responsible for it. A legally binding custodial agreement governs the minimum documented use, transfer conditions, and the prohibition on secondary markets. A hand-bound single-copy book, itself an object, itself irreproducible, contains the conceptual brief, the photographs that inspired it, the heraldic research that informed it, the material history that supports it, and the narrative the object is now tasked with carrying through time. The music production practice, Afro House, Tribal House, Bale Funk, Afro-Caribbean sonic architecture with isiZulu and isiXhosa lyrical traditions, is the sonic register in which the PLCFA framework's commitments to labor density, material memory, and cultural custodianship are expressed. 140 plus original compositions. Over 121,000 SoundCloud plays in a single month without marketing. The sonic program is not peripheral to OAC's critical practice. It is the same argument made at a different frequency. Cognition as artistic medium, the central thesis. The central claim of this study is not that OAC uses artificial intelligence effectively. It is that OAC has constituted a new artistic medium, institutional cognition, the structured capacity to perceive, remember, synthesize, and project as an institution, treated as a primary material of artistic practice. In OAC's model, research is not a preliminary step to the artwork. It is the artistic practice, the continuous evaluation of cultural signals through the four ontological poles of the PLCFA framework constitutes an ongoing, theoretically governed performance of institutional sensor-making. Every signal evaluated is an act of institutional perception. The framework decides what is relevant. The deliberative process decides what it means. The resulting study, object, or music production is the artifact. But the perception, deliberation, and synthesis that precede it are the practice, and they are now architecturally governed rather than episodically conducted. Memory, similarly, is an artistic practice. As explored in the paradox of narrative permanence, an institution's ability to recall its past arguments, track the evolution of its vocabulary in the public sphere, and identify the exact moment when external actors begin consuming its critical lexicon constitutes a deliberate act of conceptual preservation. Material memory is not a metaphor in OAC's practice. It is an operationally enforced, architecturally enforced, permanently archived protocol. Research is not a preliminary step to the artwork. Memory is not a byproduct of production. Continuity is not an aspiration. In OAC's model, all three are primary artistic practices. Designed, engineered, and compounded with the same intentionality, the institution applies to every object it makes. The closed loop. How the studies produce the software that compounds the studies, there is a dimension of OAC's practice that this study would be incomplete without naming directly, because it represents the most philosophically consequential aspect of what has been built, and the aspect that no existing critical framework has yet described. OAC's critical studies did not merely inform the development of its intelligence infrastructure, they produced it. The 29-term proprietary lexicon, developed across the first studies OAC published, became the semantic architecture of the infrastructure's signal filter. Every incoming cultural signal is evaluated against the vocabulary that the studies coined. The four ontological poles of the PLCFA framework, articulated in the foundational theoretical studies, became the scoring dimensions of the priority engine. Every signal receives a density score based on how many poles it engages. The deliberative positions that the academic studies establish on materiality, on provenance, on custodianship, on anti-speculative legal design, on the sonic dimensions of institutional necrophagy, became the epistemological identities of the deliberative protocol's agents. The institutional voice that the studies perform across 110+ publications became the constitutional identity block that precedes every analytical function in the system. In other words, the studies are not documented alongside the infrastructure. The studies are the source material for the infrastructure. Every theoretical position OAC has published is operationally active inside the system that evaluates new signals, deliberates on their significance, and generates new thesis pathways. In OAC's practice, publication and operationalization are the same act. The studies produced the framework. The framework produced the software. The software compounds the studies. The compounding studies deepen the framework. This is not a workflow. It is a closed loop of meaning production, the first of its kind in the history of critical art institutions. This closed loop has a consequence that is easy to state but difficult to fully absorb. Every study OAC publishes makes the system that will evaluate the next cultural signal more precise. A study on aura transaction deepens the deliberative protocol's capacity to identify aura extraction in a new corporate collaboration. A study on institutional necrophagy expands the evidentiary corpus against which future vocabulary appropriations are detected. The archive does not merely record what the institution has argued. It actively makes the institution more capable of arguing the next thing. Output becomes generative input. The loop closes. The recursion extends to the physical objects. Each commissioned object is the material instantiation of a theoretical position established by the studies. The alligator loafer, whose material was sourced from a specific named animal in a specific ecosystem, is the physical expression of the trauma provenance argument. The scarf woven from Lake Como silk and hand-finished at Henry Poole is the physical expression of the labor density argument. The hand-bound single-copy book delivered with every commission is the physical expression of the narrative permanence argument. The commissioned object does not illustrate the theory. It is the theory in material form, and the theory was produced by the studies. And the studies are now operationalized in the infrastructure that will generate the next thesis pathway and produce the next study. The loop closes again, at the level of the physical object. Every commissioned object is a study made physical. Every study is a commissioned object made theoretical. The infrastructure that connects them is not administrative overhead. It is the medium through which OAC's practice achieves the recursive depth that no single output could sustain alone. The infrastructure as object, OAC Agent Command under the one original principle. The argument in the last section leads to a conclusion that institutional art theory has not previously had occasion to draw because the condition it describes has not previously existed. It requires stating plainly. OAC Agent Command is an object of affection, not metaphorically, not by analogy, by the precise application of the same criteria that govern every bespoke object OAC has produced. It was made to exact theoretical specifications. The PLCFA framework at full ontological depth, operationalized as code. It was made under carte blanche. The founder specified the institutional requirements and directed the implementation across 33 build iterations without a brief from any external client. It is governed by the one original principle. There is one instance of this system, running on one device, held by one institution. It has never been licensed. It has never been replicated. It cannot be reproduced without the framework, and the framework cannot be reproduced without the 110-plus studies that give its terms evidentiary weight, and the studies cannot be reproduced without the 39 commissioned objects that embody the framework in material form, and the commissioned objects cannot be reproduced without the patron relationships built through a protocol that begins with listening rather than pitching. No addition, no multiple, no secondary market. Its labor density is extraordinary and measurable. 828 lines of proprietary Kotlin code, 31 source files, 21 database tables, 18 distinct analytical functions, a 12-position deliberative protocol, a dual-stage signal filter evaluating 80-plus semantic keyword patterns, a permanent cloud archive streaming 5 data channels continuously, all built across 33 versions by a founder who is not a software engineer, through a process of conceptual direction that is itself a novel form of artistic labor. The object required a new kind of making. The full study is available at objectsofaffectioncollection.com.